Today, I'm going to be giving a presentation on Drought Monitoring 101. We're going to go over some of the different forecast products that are available for the basin as a whole, and then kind of dive into the subbasins individually. Okay. So as Carrie mentioned, one of the key questions for our drought contingency planning is how will we recognize the next drought in the early stages? So this process that we're talking about now is one of the ways that we can answer that question with drought monitoring. And this is one of the 6 required elements for the DCP. So basically, we're going to be talking about how we can establish a process for drought monitoring and a framework for predicting the probability of future droughts or confirming the existence of a drought. And that's sort of the language that we got straight from reclamation. So this is sort of how are we going to go about making that happen? Does anyone have any questions so far? Keep going. So drought monitoring is really that question of how do we measure drought? What are the forecast products that are currently in use and how can the DCP leverage them? And then identifying gaps in either our information by location or by time. So that's kind of the layout for the presentation today. So the first thing that I thought we better get clear on is when we say we're measuring drought, what exactly are we measuring? So kind of our working definition for drought is when the river has less water than average and the needs of the community and the environment are not met. So kind of that combination of both a physical, hydrological, sort of experience that's happening, but also then that physical natural resource that we've got is unable to meet the needs of the community and the environment. So those two things in tandem. So really our big, the big thing that we're actually trying to measure is going to be stream flow. And the drivers of stream flow for the Upper Gunnison Basin, that's going to be our temperature, precipitation, snowpack, soil moisture, and reservoir storage. And sort of those things together can help give us a view of what the future stream flow is going to be. So we care about stream flow today and stream flow into the future. Does anyone have any other comments on that working definition of drought and our focus on stream flow and then the drivers that go into it? Okay, on the same page, perfect. So I think I just wanted to start with this map of available data. And, we wanted to start working with the stakeholder group here and make sure, with the task force group, make sure that everyone is aware of all of the information that's currently available, and then make sure that we're leveraging all of the products that are already in existence instead of trying to build the wheel, reinvent the wheel kind of thing. So the first big thing, in terms of available data for snowpack, we've got our SNOTEL sites, and those are shown on the map in the purple dots. And I know that folks in this group are super aware of the SNOTEL information and that maybe you pull information for a particular SNOTEL site for your basin. But this is a great network, and we've got actually pretty decent coverage for the Upper Gunnison. The other way that we can measure snowpack, and I've got the abbreviation in here, is the ASOs, the Airborne Snow Observatory. And this is more of the cutting edge research side of things where we're actually flying LiDAR flights. So using airborne. So flying an airplane over the basin to measure the snowpack. So that's not shown on because that's a sort of like an aerial coverage. We got our stream flow gauges. So I've got our active USGS gauges in the yellow dots, and then climate stations. So temperature and precipitation, where are we measuring that at points? So those are going to be the orange dots. And then Sonia has talked about having some of that, the gap radar getting installed. So hopefully we'll have some aerial coverage for some of the precipitation measurements as well. And then the last piece is that reservoir storage. So we've got Taylor Park at sort of the top of the basin, and then the Aspinall units, a Blue Mesa reservoir towards the bottom of the Upper Gunnison.
Yeah, and Lisa, I was just going to clarify just really quickly that right now, just due to the expense of these ASO flights, we're only able to fly the East and the Taylor River Basin, but they are our largest water producing basins. And so that's why we focus on those two.
Yeah. Thanks, Sonia. Yep. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about what drives drought in the Upper Gunnison. So there are probably a couple of different pieces of drought, especially as we move through the water year. So we've got our current conditions. So basically, what are we experiencing on the ground right now? We've got carryover conditions. So this is really, what has happened in the past that is then having a lagged impact into the future. So this we really see in our soil moisture levels and our reservoir storage. So kind of those two places, where is water being stored in the basin? Are we going into the next season with good storage, either in the soil moisture or in the reservoirs, or are we going in with average or low storage levels? And then seasonally, because the Gunnison is that snowmelt dominated basin, we're really looking at that volume of during the runoff period. So the runoff period typically is defined as April 1st through July 31st. There's a lot in the basin that's kind of hinging on what is the stream flow volume during that time frame. So there's a lot of effort already going on to predict what those flows are going to be in order to set us up for operations, either in anticipation of a wet year, an average year, or a drought year. And then I did just want to throw in that we've got monsoon impacts that can occur in the basin as well. And that's more of like a July through September timeframe. So in addition to that snowmelt dominated, we can also see some streamflow fluctuation based on high levels of rainfall precipitation being driven by the monsoons. All right. So the next topic we're going to talk about are the forecasts. So basically, we're gathering this information about temperature, precipitation, snowpack, stream flow, soil moisture, reservoirs. All of that raw data then gets fed into the different computer models, and that is then spitting out the info. So we're going to talk about a couple of the different information and forecast providers that are currently active in the Upper Gunnison right now. And then we'll talk about ways that we can start leveraging these products. So we're going to go over the U.S. Drought Monitor, the NRCS, and then the Airborne Snow Observatory and the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center. Okay, so I'm calling the U.S. Drought Monitor one of our information examples. So the U.S. Drought Monitor is really that snapshot of current conditions. So this can really ground us in what's going on in the basin right now. They publish these lovely maps, and I've got the state of Colorado highlighted here, and I pulled this. Actually, this is their map that they published last week. So basically, these come out every Thursday. So the most recent map that we've got is from January 18th. And they use a blend of physical indicators into their computer models. So they're monitoring precipitation, streamflow, soil moisture. And then they also have meetings with drought experts throughout the country, and that helps them discern the impacts of drought. So they're really keying off of that, what are the economic and the environmental impacts that the basin is experiencing due to the stream flow and soil moisture conditions. And then, this is really helpful for understanding the existing drought conditions. And then we can kind of start using it. They also have like a forecast discussion portion as well. And we can use it to start identifying potential year types based on how past years have unfolded. Yes.
Oh, go ahead, Ashley.
Thanks. Hi, Lisa. Before you move on from the drought monitor slide, I was curious, they don't use air temperature at all. It's just an indirect measure through soil moisture. Is that right?
Ashley, that's a really good question. And I am not exactly sure if they don't use temperature or not. It seems like temperature would be an important piece of the puzzle. I will have to circle back on that and let you know.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Any other questions on the drought monitor? Just quick note there. All right, so this next plot here is so this is the NRCS, the National Resource Conservation Service. So they are the snowtail providers. So this map here is showing, it's got a lot of information on it, but basically each of the dots is an individual snowtail site. And then they also provide combine that information for the contributing headwaters for each of the river basins in Colorado. So these are nice. These are like these interactive plots, and I threw it on the website there. So if you guys want to go check it out, but these are released daily. And then they also have, I'm sure you guys have seen this graph before, but this is your snow water equivalent. So not only just the measure of, how much precipitation has fallen, but how much water is sitting in the snow at the specific snowtail sites. So this is a nice little interactive plot here, and basically it's color-coded based on the historical information. I selected the area for the Gunnison, so it's kind of combining the snowtail sites that are upstream of the contributing watershed for the Gunnison. And basically this black line here is showing how is the snow accumulating for the Gunnison Basin. So we can really see okay, back at the beginning of the year, we were tending toward a pretty dry situation. We've gotten a lot of snowpack in early January, and so we're looking much better as we kind of move into February. We're now getting much closer to the median. Now, of course, we don't know what's going to happen next. Are we going to keep getting those storms and follow that median trace? Or are we going to start falling back off? Or are we going to, it's the future is uncertain at this point. But this can help start showing us sort of the range of possibilities for how that snow might play out for us this year. And I did go ahead and you can click on other years as well. So this, I couldn't control the colors, but the purple here is from 2021. So this was also sort of a drier year in the basin. And then I think it's kind of difficult to see, but this olive green was 2018. And 2018 was then the minimum year for a lot of the snowpack accumulation season, and wound up being one of a very dry year for the Upper Gunnison. So you can kind of start playing with, okay, which kinds of years does this year remind us of? Okay, so then we're going to jump over to some of our forecast examples. So once we've got all of this raw data collected, then what can we do to start predicting how is the water year going to pan out for us? So the first forecast example we're going to go over is provided by the Airborne Snow Observatory, so ASO. And I really want to emphasize, we're going to look at two different forecast providers, but for ASO, these guys are really on the cutting edge of research and hydrological modeling and forecasts. So the lead scientist on this is David Gotchis, and he's leading for the Gunnison Basin, as Sonia said, doing that Taylor and East flights, and then providing those forecasts as well. He is running the WRF, it's called WRF Hydro Model. So this is a very detailed gridded product, and it provides water supply forecasts. And basically you can become one of his clients, and he can focus on your unique situation and really get stuff tuned in for the area that you're at. And in fact, some of the inputs include sensors that the airborne snow that David has installed specifically upstream of Taylor Park Reservoir, and also the ASO measurements. So being able to fly those LiDAR flights to get that gridded information. And this on the side here is an example graph this was from a May 10th, 2020, so last year, forecast, but just showing the gridded SWE that was left in the East and Taylor River watersheds at that point. So you can really get this feel for the geographic distribution. Where is the snow by elevation, in addition to the depth measurements. So this is giving you a lot of highly detailed information for these two subbasins. And now I did want to zoom out just a little bit, because David is also, one of the things that this gridded product is looking at is the soil moisture, because that's definitely a key component of how much of the snow water equivalent actually gets translated into runoff. So these are some of these soil moisture graphs that his model can produce. But then the forecast is focused on that accumulated runoff, this key indicator for the Taylor Park Reservoir operations, and is already being used extensively by the TLUG group. And these are at least monthly meetings from March through September, and they can be more frequent as needed. And then basically you can contract with them for custom forecasts. And the nice part about this gridded model is that you can extract modeled values basically at any location. Now the calibration is going to be the best at the gauge locations, but you can get information on a much more detailed basis. Okay, so in contrast, we've got the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center, which is also producing the same water supply forecasts. But they are doing some additional forecasts as well. So this is a branch of the National Weather Service. So they are one of the federal, funded by your federal tax dollars, and they're looking at the entire United States. Now, the Colorado Basin Forecast Center is focused on obviously the Colorado watershed. But you can access their website every single day, and they also provide monthly webinars, typically in conjunction with reclamation. And this graph or this map that I'm showing here is where they are offering their water supply forecasts. So we've got one for Taylor Park. This is I think we've got both the East River at Almont and then the Gunnison. And then we've got the Gunnison River near Gunnison, Tamichi at the mouth, basically. And then they're also forecasting Lake Fork at Gateview. And then we've got, of course, Blue Mesa Reservoir itself. And the triangles are color-coded by where they think we're going to be. So right now they're forecasting essentially just below average year. So we're in the 90 to 100% range for that water supply forecast. Again, that April 1st through July 31st volume. So it's available, and this is available at some of the long-term USGS gauges. Okay, so I wanted to throw in this graph because this is kind of their big product that they're putting out in terms of the water supply forecasts. So I just wanted to walk you through the kind of how a forecast might unfold. So I pulled the values from 2023. So this is the Gunnison River near Gunnison. And basically, as you walk through, time is on the bottom. And the purple cloud is showing the range of the forecast, where they think your maximum and your minimum possibilities are. And then the dark purple line is your most probable forecast for every single day that they are producing the values. So basically, we're starting off in mid-December with a guess based on what the snowpack is at that time. And the more you move through the season, values change as the snowpack changes as well. So basically, when we were sitting kind of in this early season of January, February, and March, for 2023, they were essentially calling for right around an average year. And then once we get to April, this is really where these forecasts start to get a bit more skillful. And that's because we've got most of the snowpack already on the ground at that point. So by the time we get to April, now we're calling for an above average year. And basically, as the snow melt starts coming off, then, by the time you get to the end of the season, that July 31st, your forecast had better equal your observations. So then this orange blob at the bottom here, this is showing the accumulated runoff volume that came past that Gunnison River at Gunnison gauge. So this is basically showing you how much stream flow, if you were to capture all of that in a bucket, how much volume would you have? So that is where we're at here. So that's kind of quick run through of the CBRFC's water supply forecast. And, as those storms built up in March last year, we really had a jump up from average to, an above average year for 2023. So that was a nice, hopefully a nice water year for everybody. And so with that in mind,
So we have
Lisa, Carrie's got a
Oh, I have a question.
oh, yep, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. No, I'm just curious I know you say it's like the blue lines are the average or the most probable. Is
Yep.
that the 50% in the statistics, or is most probable?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And then the top and the lower are like 90 and 10 percentiles. Is that
I
correct?
believe.
Okay,
Yep, exactly.
cool. Thanks. I couldn't quite
Yeah.
remember if it was just like the median or if it really was like an average number, but that makes sense. If it's the 50.
I think it actually is the median of the forecast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's kind of that, it's the exceedance probability. So the most likely forecast is the median forecast value. So
Correct.
yeah, I mean, I think what I'm just trying to emphasize here is that when you start looking at these forecasts in January, look how big this range is. This is huge. I mean, you could have had like a pretty bad drought year, or you could have had a pretty good year based on these forecasts in January. You really don't know. But by the time we start narrowing in, like that April 1st forecast is really what a lot of people start hanging their hats on, because that's where we've got a lot more skill. And when I say skill, I mean the forecast is a narrower range, and we're getting much better at estimating what the volume is actually going to be during that time frame. At this point, you can probably say with pretty good confidence, hey, we're above average. This is not going to be a drought year. And then that next question of like, okay, well, what decisions do you need to make? How sure do you need to be, kind of thing. So basically, their most probable forecast at that point was probably, within 10 to 20% of the volume that was actually observed that year. Yeah, were there other questions on this graph?
Yeah, Ashley has one.
Oh, hi, Ashley.
So my question was, if you could please explain the difference between, the lavender sort of projected range that you were just discussing versus the official pink dots. Like, what are they actually reporting there? And
Yeah,
what can we learn from it?
Yep, no, that's a good question, Ashley. So the lavender range, so basically the story is that since CBRFC is this operational forecasting center, they're running the models every single day. And so they're basically publishing the output from the model every single day. And that's what's creating the lavender like cloud. And then on the first of the month, then they have a forecaster like interact with the forecast and provide official guidance as well. So this is sort of then like the purple line is computer generated, and then the pink line is like computer and human generated together.
So can we learn anything from areas where there's deviations between the pink and the purple, or does that not typically occur? It just seems odd to me that official and the purple cloud match so well. And I'm, just curious.
Yeah, I think the primary piece of information that the forecaster is using to make those official forecasts, the pink part, is the lavender information. So they're using that data to develop their official forecasts. I would actually be more concerned if there was like vastly different information that the forecasters were putting out that like deviated wildly from their models. That would be a little that would be more concerning to me than if they basically lined up. Yeah. Okay, any other questions on the CBRFC forecast?
I don't see any.
Okay, thanks, Stacy. Okay, so I just wanted to throw in the 2024 graph. So here we are back in January, and basically, hey, they're calling for essentially an average year, which is exactly what they said in 2023 at this time. And so basically, we don't know what the year's going to turn out to be at this point. We can peer into our crystal ball and say, hey, we've got a pretty big range. We could tend dry. We could wind up about average, but it's just going to depend on how the snowpack plays out in the next couple of months. Yeah, just want to emphasize how high that range is right now. So the last forecast product that I wanted to touch on is reclamation. And one of the reasons, we've got the ASO information, which is that cutting edge research, very detailed for the Upper Gunnison, which is very nice. But we also have CBRFC, and I wanted to bring that in because reclamation relies on CBRFC for their forecasting when they're doing their Blue Mesa operations. So that's kind of like, look at both because they're both going to be considered by users in the basin. So Reclamation is plugging in their information from CBRFC into their Blue Mesa Reservoir model. This figure, I grabbed this screenshot from the May 25th, 2023 forecast. So we're basically well into the runoff at that point. But Blue Mesa, their releases under the record of decision are determined by that forecasted inflow. So having good CBRFC information at Blue Mesa is critical for Blue Mesa operations. But Reclamation provides their forecasts by email, and then they also do a monthly webinar. They actually did one, I think it was last week. And so, yep, you can, and they go through the whole situation of like, here's your situational awareness in terms of where do they see the soil moisture, where do they see the snowpack, where do they see the forecast for like both short term and then like that 3-month outlook. So yep, they're going through a lot of information and trying to make the best decisions they can based on where the forecast is looking. Okay, I think those were all my forecast examples. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, so I did just want to try and tie a bow on that by breaking out this timeline. So, since the Gunnison is such the snowmelt dominated basin, when do we have good information at different points in time? So I kind of wanted to just to highlight from November to January, we can use the drought monitor and our existing information about soil moisture and reservoir storage to really get a handle on current conditions and start thinking about these are the conditions that are going to be then the carryover conditions for the next water year. So how are our storage vessels setting up? When we get into the February through July timeframe, now we're looking at the drought monitor for our current conditions. SWE, checking out what's going on with that snow water equivalent, what's happening with the snowpack in the basin. And then we are looking at, then we can start doing those seasonal water supply forecasts. So these are our true forecasts issued by CBRFC and ASO, and we're trying to predict conditions through the fall or through the summer and into the fall. Once we get into that August through October timeframe, we're kind of back to, all right, what are our current conditions? And then maybe we can take a peek at like near future as well. And by near future, I mean like what's happening in the next 10 days. So we're looking at the drought monitor and then also looking at like CBRFC and ASO for those near current conditions, as we especially are kind of seeing how the monsoons are stacking up. But I do want to just give that caution for that seasonal water supply, for CBRFC, I would say April 1st is probably the soonest that you can really start making decisions based on that information. All right, any questions on timeline? Okay, I did just want to talk about a couple of additional considerations, because the products that we've talked about so far are very much like a science-driven, where we're pulling in observed information, pushing it through the computer models, talking with experts, and then publishing something either on a website or via email or monthly format, or pushing the information out to the public that way. But for the Gunnison, we also have this interplay between hydrological conditions and the water administration, which we're going to talk about more today. But basically, one of the things that we can start keying off of as well is when do the calls start coming on? And an early call can indicate dry conditions in the basin. And then there's also that anecdotal evidence as well. I think we talked about this briefly before, but from ranchers, are their springs running? Are their springs running, or are their springs dry? Are their stock water tanks holding up, or are they getting low? Kind of that information from the folks that are out on the ground as well. And then from the municipalities, are they starting to experience stress on their distribution systems? So these are some of the other indicators of drought in addition to sort of the very scientific information.
Lisa, Sonia has a question.
Sorry, good.
Hey, Lisa, can you just quickly define what a call is?
Oh, yes. So a call on the river is when a senior water right holder is not able to divert their full water right. So they ask the state of Colorado to turn off upstream water users that have junior water rights. So we're basically starting to, and that's called administering the river, where we're then taking, basically starting to, instead of delivering by upstream to downstream, we're now delivering by priority of water rights. And I'm sure John McLeod and Bob Herfer will explain it in much better detail.
Thanks. And Ashley has a question also.
Oh,
I
sure.
just wanted to add a comment. This is something that comes up when I speak with environmentally minded folks, and I think maybe it could be helpful for our stakeholder outreach. I think that there's generally a misunderstanding that in order to place a call, the water user has to dry the stream and, pass the teacup test. And in my experience, a lot of people don't realize that that's necessary to place a call. And so I think that's something we should be sharing with stakeholders, as we communicate about those, basic water rights stuff. So.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.
Okay, so then hopefully this will be a little bit more interactive portion of the presentation where we're talking about identifying gaps. So we've got a lot of information, but the question is, do we have the right information at the right locations? So this next portion of the presentation is going to walk through by subbasin. So where does each subbasin have/need drought monitoring information? So it's kind of that interplay of, where are we trying to make decisions, and do we have the information we need at those places where we're trying to make our decisions? And so we're going to talk through, I've broken it out by subbasin so that we can kind of start getting the wheels turning about, do we have information gaps or do we have good coverage? I mean, that could very well be an outcome from this, that we've got good informational coverage to support the decisions that we need to be making as we're trying to monitor drought. So I'm going to go around the basin clockwise. So I started with the Ohio. So the primary value is agriculture, and this map is showing in the bright green the irrigated acreage. Again, the yellow dots are the 2 active USGS gauges in the basin, and CBRFC has a forecast at the mouth. Offers a forecast at the mouth of the Ohio. And then ASO actually does a forecast for Ohio at Baldwin. And basically, these can be starting to identify the hydrologic year type. And I think what we're ultimately gunning for is being able to quantify drought by comparing historical stream flow, and then the community in this area would be the agricultural producer information, and then start pulling in some of those environmental metrics as well to say what is drought based on that, both that physical flow reality, and then when are we starting to feel impacts. Okay. East/slate. So the primary values for this area are also irrigation. And then we've got municipal and industrial with the Crested Butte area, both municipality and then the ski resort. And then basically the whole basin is just widely used for recreation. Got 5 USGS gauges, so very well gauged basin. CBRFC and ASO are both providing forecasts at the mouth, and ASO is also doing forecasts for the Slate River near Crested Butte and Coal Creek near Crested Butte. So we've got a couple of the upper headwater basins with ASO forecasts as well. So the drought impacts, we can see the snowmaking diversions because they've got their bypass requirements. That's going to start pinching on that. Flow impact, both the type of recreation and the recreational season length. If, lower flows are better for your stand-up paddle boarders, higher flows are better for your whitewater kayakers. So you can shift which type of recreation is able to occur in an area based on the flows. And then, of course, the length of the season. And then low flows definitely can impact those environmental values, and then the municipal supplies. In addition to the municipal water providers, we also have Lake Meridian, which is one of the big augmentation sources for well users in the basin. So this can definitely, drought can cause a pinch point for Lake Meridian as well. But quantifying drought, and I basically made the suggestion we can compare our historical stream flow, and then the M&I, recreation use, and agricultural producer information to start getting a handle on that.
Lisa, Julie has a question.
Oh, yep, go ahead.
Hey, Lisa. And I see this listed. I'm just curious, can you walk me through again how low flows or dry ups would be addressed for the environmental low flow? I know it's listed on this slide, but I think I'm just not following how that's going to be assessed.
I think at this point, Julia, we're talking about how can we start to identify drought and how are we
Right.
going to monitor drought? So I don't think we're at the addressing drought
Well,
phase.
sorry. Would that be an indicator of drought, for instance, if you're looking at an environmental value, if you had dry ups in certain locations?
Yes, I think that would definitely be a drought indication where the stream flow is not able to meet the needs of the environment at that time. Yeah.
So I guess I'm just asking if that is a metric that's going to be, because the way it's just portrayed on this slide, I wasn't clear on if that's an identifying factor.
I mean, I think that's what we're hoping to talk about today. What are
Okay.
the different identifying factors that we need to make sure that we're considering?
Gotcha.
And I would say, right now we've got the 5 USGS gauges as well. Are there, speaking to those information gaps, are there other areas where we're concerned about the environmental impact that dry up is having, but we don't have like an easy way to measure it?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of examples about like in town near the right below the McCormick Creek gauge, sometimes there's a dry up, and when we get calls from the community or you're talking about different ways to clue into drought, that's definitely, there's a few areas where we get calls when there's low flows or that kind of thing. And by calls, I mean on the telephone, not the technical call.
Sure.
And I'm just wondering how those kind of high visibility recreational areas where folks will report dry ups, if that's something that has a place in here.
Yeah, and I guess, Julie, do you think does it seem like the gauge is not cluing in to that?
On some of these areas are too far away from the gauge, and I use that
Gotcha.
as an example.
Sure,
but,
sure.
for instance, I think probably the district also gets sometimes photos sent in by people or just phone calls about dry ups.
And I
So
do think that anecdotal information is really important because every basin is so different. And so I think as we talk about, what the community will do when they see those kind of things, you can use the forecast, but you can also use this information to start to communicate with your public about, paying more attention to their water use or, being aware that when you have low flows, you can have E. coli issues and it's maybe not as safe for public to be in the water. Is that those are my thoughts, Julie.
yeah, or I'm also just thinking about, for instance, I know that angling, certain guiding companies will communicate within house about low flow areas and kind of stressed areas in the fisheries. And that's often not captured at the gauge location. So
Sure.
just if there's a means to accommodate that
And
as an
most
indicator.
about it, I think, Julie, for us with the T-Lug or sometimes the boating or rafting companies will give us a call and let us know that they're seeing things on the river. Sometimes it could be concerns about algal growth. People, at certain times are not used to seeing that. So when we've had these really bad years, people become very concerned when they see those algal blooms starting to happen.
Yeah,
So
that
T-Lug,
type
but
of
if you
kind of
guys have any
anecdotal.
others, yeah, I'd love to just start listing them because they are important.
Well, and I think just to like wrap this up a little bit, to say that we establishing a communication expectation and method to get that information to where it needs to be gotten to at the district, I think it might be kind of what Julie is saying here is like, where's that system in place? Because right now it's just kind of happening. It sounds like it's happening sometimes, but not consistently getting always to the district. Is that what I'm hearing?
I like characterizing it as a system or just something that is incorporated, because I think we are getting these things through different channels. But there's just maybe not a mechanism for it to be incorporated as an indicator, and they're pretty good indicators sometimes.
And I think that's where we're going to get to at a later stage when we talk about our communication strategy. And that is a task that will come just a little bit later.
Thanks. So next we have Shay, and then we need to kind of probably keep moving.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're acknowledged, when we talk about municipal supplies being affected,
Mhm.
that the tail end of our system also has the potential of seeing a lot of negative effects from drought. And that's with respect to our wastewater discharge. So I think it's just as important for us to acknowledge that aspect of it as it is to acknowledge water supply for our drinking water.
That's a good point, Shay. I had not considered the tail end.
Thank you. Any other questions on this before Lisa moves on? Thanks for the input so far.
Right. Okay, Taylor Basin. So this is our big Taylor Park Reservoir. Lots of information, lots of focus on this basin for impacts to Taylor, definitely park. So values include both flatwater recreation, whitewater boating, fishing, lots of recreation happening downstream and at the reservoir itself. We've got 4 USGS gauges, and we've got ASO and CBRFC forecasting the Taylor Park inflow. And ASO has also broken it down basically by each of the contributing streams. And the ASO forecasts are what's being used by TLUG to help determine those recreational operations with regard to Taylor Park Reservoir. We're quantifying drought by looking at the streamflow levels, reservoir storage, and recreation use. And there was that boatable days study by American Whitewater, and we've got the link back to the Upper Gunnison website there. Any other considerations for the Taylor Basin? Oops, I do see a hand. I see a hand up, but I don't see a name.
Brennan, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Can the data from the USGS stations above Taylor Park be integrated with the outflow from Taylor Park Dam? So that in essence, you've got 3, or I'm sorry, you have 5 flow measures on that.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And then
Thanks.
they also real time. We also are measuring Taylor Park Reservoir itself, and Reclamation is publishing that information in real time.
Okay. Thanks.
Lisa, and I would just add to Taylor, there is a subordination agreement that talks about the operations. This is one of the unique areas, I think, in the basin where we have a significant in-stream flow right. And that in-stream flow right actually dictates a lot about how this reservoir is operated. And if anybody is interested in learning more about it, please feel free to reach out and we can share that with you.
Thanks, Sonia. Okay, so the main stem, my attempt to do clockwise. So we got our values of irrigation, municipal with the town of Gunnison, widely used for recreation with the RICD. We've got 3, there's a lot of USGS gauges on this map, but I'm counting this one toward the Ohio and this one toward the Tomichi. So there's 3 USGS gauges, and the flow impacts both the type of recreation and the recreational season length. And then of course, Blue Mesa Reservoir itself. In terms of flatwater recreation, some of these drought impacts that we're seeing in terms of, Sonia brought up about the harmful algae blooms, and then considering, how Blue Mesa Reservoir is connected to the rest of the Colorado River Basin, and the potential, which we have seen in past years, for emergency drought releases to Lake Powell, where we're pulling water out of the Aspinall unit and moving that downstream. So drought can have a wide-reaching impact here. But our low flows are impacting our environmental values, municipal supplies, and then the recreational values as well. And then looking to quantify drought by comparing historical stream flow, recreation use, municipal concerns, agricultural producer information. And then again, that we've got that boatable days study for the Whitewater Park and the Gunnison River at McCabe's.
So Lisa, is the Tomichi Basin not gauged separately, or is it considered part of the main stem?
Nope, we've got Tomichi up next. So good segue. So we've got the Tamichi Basin. It has 5 USGS gauges, sort of scattered throughout. And then there is the Tamichi gauge at the mouth. So CBRC is doing their forecast at the mouth. And then ASO is publishing a forecast for Sargent's, which I don't have on the slide, but we'll get that updated. But basically, the primary value for the Tamichi is agriculture. So we start comparing our stream flow information to our agricultural producer information, I think we'll probably get a pretty good handle on when drought is occurring. Looking for hands. All right. Seeing none, marching on to the
I've
Saboya.
got a question here.
Oops, sorry.
So in Tamichi, there's a number of residents along the valley corridor, and they use individual drinking water wells. So it's not a municipal use, but I'm just wondering how or whether this plan would include options to, assure that those folks have access to, domestic water in their wells during a really severe drought.
Sonia, you have a response?
Yeah. So really, I mean, I think I don't know that the Upper Gunnison has ever received calls or information or concerns from people with regard to the performance of their drinking water wells during times of drought in that area, because it is really at that base of where a lot of that snowfall might come in that area. But I know there are other mining issues which impact it. And I think one of the things to think about, I think with drought, is that when there is a call from the senior water right holder on the Tamichi, they will change the areas and go to alternate diversion points to move that water down to the senior water right holder, which could have an impact maybe on water quality due to seepage from some of those ditches that might have influence on the town wells and stuff. And so I guess actually maybe that's the one thing I'm thinking of, but we don't typically hear or see calls because they're all groundwater municipal or domestic wells versus surface water supplies.
Right. And I guess I just recall, years ago when we were doing interviews with some of the landowners, that some of them reported that they thought their domestic well relied on return flows from their irrigated ag. And so that was kind of the direction I was going with my comment.
Got it. Yeah. And you are right. There was one, I think it's the employees that stay in that CDOT house. I think that was one of the wells that was really highly influenced with regard to the way irrigation water was used. So if they do take it at an alternate diversion point, I think it would affect that well specifically. So that is something for us to keep in the back of our mind. I forgot about that one.
Yeah, and as climate change marches on, we might see more of those problems.
Sure.
Great, thanks. Just doing a time check, Lisa, maybe like five more minutes. We need to wrap up.
Okay, we get it. We can do it. Saboya values are irrigation and recreation, including on-stream and fishing ponds. Yeah, no active stream flow gauges, so this could be a data gap. What we have seen in the past is that it appears that the Lake Fork gauges can serve as a good analog, or we have used them as analogs, but that could potentially be a data gap. But basically we're looking at the fishing season and then the ability to fill those off-channel fishing ponds as some of our primary drought impacts, and then the environmental values in the Saboya as well. Quick comments? Marching onward, Lake Fork, last one. Values are municipal and industrial, agriculture, recreation, including those on-stream, both on-stream and fishing ponds. We've got 3 USGS gauges. I think some of them are covered up by my, by my orange dots here, but there are 3 of them. We've got the CBRFC forecast for the Lake Fork at Gateway, which is the one at the bottom. And then the flows can impact the fishing season, as well as the ability to fill those ponds. And then we also have an augmentation provider in this area as well. Lake Cristobal is an augmentation source. So if we're starting to get low reservoir levels, that can, actually, to your point, in addition to physical water available to the wells, then that administrative water as well. So that kind of was the around the horn. I think, were there
Hey,
any final
Lisa?
thoughts? Yes,
Yeah, just, I think you said gate something. I think it's gate view.
Gate View. Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
thank you.
And the other two are just directly below the reservoir. So it's the Lake Fork below the reservoir. And then I think the other one is Henson Creek, which is a tributary to the Lake Fork.
Great.
Great.
So Lisa, if you want to, we have about 5 minutes and then we can move to our next presenter. So,
Okay. Well, I think, I just wanted to talk about the next steps in terms of leveraging existing products, making sure we're filling in as many of our info gaps as possible. Sounds like we've got a couple of thoughts on pulling in some of that anecdotal information, maybe in a bit more streamlined or systematic fashion, so that we're really capturing all of it and making sure we can get that fed into the communications plan as well. But we really want to make sure that we're getting things relevant to the local communities. But especially as we're starting to develop our stages of drought and tying, back to historical years to those drought metrics in order to be able to communicate with the public.
And if anyone has any thoughts that they didn't get to communicate at this time, feel free to reach out to Stacy and put those thoughts in an email while they're fresh. And yeah, we can have, right now it's kind of sort of an education opportunity, but definitely looking for input as we move forward.
Hey, Sonia, is there any plan to put a gauge on Savoya? It seems like it's a big, problem that we don't know. We don't even have
Yeah,
a
so I
single
think in
gauge on
terms of water quality, you are right. That is one of the tributaries. Not a huge amount of flow, but it is a tributary where we are seeing some significant nutrients, and we haven't really been able to identify where those are coming from, whether it's natural background and geological, but for whatever reason, it has lit up in the harmful algal bloom study when they were monitoring those different tributaries. Yeah, and it could be something to look at, being a small conservancy district, we've tried to be really cognizant of how much we're spending on our program, but if that's something the community feels is really important, then I'm happy to listen.
Okay, it just seems like it's the giant basin that has no monitoring. It's like, wait a second.
Yeah. So we have a joint
Some of these have
planning-
5 gauges and this one has none. It's like,
Yeah, and a lot of it's driven by, partnerships and who's interested in it, because we have a broad basin-wide long-term monitoring program, and then we do some reconnaissance monitoring as well. So maybe it's something that we could start to do some reconnaissance monitoring in collaboration with our partners to get a better handle on nutrients and stuff and even flow.
okay.
Maybe we
All right.
should be monitoring it and get reclamation and others to help contribute, Colorado River District, others.
All right, thanks.
great.
That's
Thank
a
you.
wrap for me, Stacy.
Thank you, Lisa, so much. Like Sonia said,